I'm here to talk about is organizational culture and why that is important, and what it is, how do you measure it, how do you change it a little bit as well. So, a couple of words on myself. So, as you might have guessed, if I'm doing a CSM, I must be a Certified Scrum Trainer. So, I've been doing that for over 10 years. With you, for example, as well, we organized some trainings years and years ago.
10 years, exactly.
Yeah, 10 years ago, so that would probably the first time I was in Riga to do a CSM, so 10 years ago. That's been a while. It's the first time I'm here since COVID, so 3 years ago probably was the last time I was physically in Riga for some clients, so great to be here, and really great that we have so many people. Hey, please come in, sit down. You don't have to stand outside. There's still plenty of places there. What else? I'm a coach, so what I do besides doing Scrum trainings, I actually help companies do this stuff. So transformations, helping teams adopt Scrum, organizations change. Mostly I work these days with leadership and management quite a bit in how to run transformations, how to change organizations, and as you might have guessed based on the talk as well, organization culture is an important part of doing an agile transition or transformation. My argument actually is the culture is the most important part of an agile transformation. If you don't start by changing the culture, probably trying to be agile is not going to work, and it's more or less doomed to fail. I'll get back to that, why that is, and give you some examples. Besides that, I'm also managing director of Agile42 Finland, so all kinds of stuff around that. Oh, and I put a boat picture there. When I'm done working, I like boating. It's my sailboat in Finland, so I like to sail. If you after the talk want to talk about sailing and boating and that kind of stuff, I'm happy to talk about that as well. Can talk a lot about boating. I work for a company called Agile42. That's most of us, plus family, plus some kids, at a company meeting. We're a German company, headquartered in Berlin, but obviously since I'm from Finland actually, we have offices around the world. So we have like offices Finland, Sweden, Italy, Germany, South Africa, US, Canada, and starting somewhere this year in Brazil as well. So quite international all around. We're not that many people, but we do have quite a bit of offices, so we're very specialized in what we do, and we have relatively small offices supporting the different countries that we have. Bonus points for someone who can find me in that picture.
Yeah.
Oh, there. So. Yeah. So, what I want to talk about. First of all, why organizational culture is important. Why should you care about what your culture is? To understand your culture a bit better. Why you maybe need to think about, okay, what kind of culture would we like to have? I want to talk a little bit about what is an organization culture, especially how do you quantify culture? How do you measure a culture? Like, how do you know what culture do you actually have? There are some techniques out there coming from research in how to do. I'm going to show you a couple of those. So that's the part of how do you know your culture. I also want to go at the end a little bit into how to change culture. So two different two tips or tricks or techniques in how to change your culture in an organization. By far not everything, but at least I want to leave you something concrete in what you could do. First thing, pestilence, war, famine, and death. I picked this to describe the current world we're living in, right? Pestilence, COVID, war, Ukraine, famine, hopefully not yet, hopefully not coming, and certainly a lot of death. However, nothing is new here. I mean, this has been forever. I mean, the sentence, pestilence, war, famine, and death. You know the source of this, where this comes from? The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Anyone know where it comes from?
Probably Bible.
Bible, so it's old, it's nothing new. This is how the world has always been. Which means also as organizations, this is the world we live in, right? And we need to have an organization that can deal with these kind of things. How many of you planned for COVID? Anyone? How many of you planned for the current war going on, all the sanctions and all the other things? Also probably no one, right? Interesting. So my argument is we need organizations that can deal with these things, that can adapt, adjust, that when something unexpected happens, that we can actually do something meaningful in the organization and survive it. So, first thing I want to introduce to you is the term VUCA. B-U-C-A. Anyone heard of that before? It's been around for a long time. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. The term is nothing new. It comes from the late 80s. It's actually the original source, as far as I know, comes from the US Army War College. As a kind of like to describe the world in which a military tends to operate. The kind of like 4 important factors that they need to take into account when they plan any kind of military operations and so on. Since then, this has become quite popular also in the business world, especially after the 2000s. This has become more and more. So what do these 4 things mean? Volatility. Well, the nature and dynamics of change, and nature and speed of change. So how do things change? They can change very rapidly, right? Just to give you an example, how many of you, when the lockdowns for COVID started, those were very rapid changes that happened, right? Also the kind of like lifting of restrictions, very fast. High volatility changes. They also happen to be very unpredictable, which is another one that we will have in there. But there's a lot of volatility to things. So things can swing around really, really quickly. If you like investment on the stock market, high volatility stock means it's going up and down quite a lot. Hence I picked a picture of the roller coaster to symbolize that. Another thing we need to deal with when we talk about organization culture is uncertainty. The lack of predictability. It's very difficult to predict things. Like I asked, how many of you predicted or prepared for COVID? None did. Interesting thing is, before COVID, you know what I asked instead of COVID? Did you prepare for it? Remember the Icelandic volcano some years ago? How many prepared for that one? Again, uncertainty. The question is, what's the next thing that's going to hit us after COVID? Problem is, I have no clue. No one does. And that's unfortunately the uncertainty that we live in. So how do you deal with that as an organization? If you don't know what to plan for, how do you plan? And how do you react? And then I'm going to talk about how that fits in with an organization culture. Complexity. I like this picture with very complex roots. Complexity means there is a lot of different things that affect your situation that you're looking at. There are no, direct, cause and effect relationships. If you go into complex adaptive systems like Kinefin, for example, what you would talk about is you have a lot of unknown unknowns. You do not know what you do not know. And in a complex system, literally there is also no way to find out what you don't know. You cannot go and analyze it and go like, yeah, this is what I don't know. No. The only way to find out what you don't know is to wait until it hits you in the face, and then you know what you don't know. If you could find through our analysis out what you don't know, it's not complex anymore. It would be complicated. That's the difference in there. And there are always things you cannot predict and know in advance. Now, think about, you have a big company, value, millions of euros in value, and you don't know what to plan for. How do you plan? If you've done strategy in an organization, for example, and you have uncertainty and unknown things you don't know, how do you create an organizational strategy or company strategy in an environment where you don't actually know what to strategize for? And you have high volatility at the same time, and things keep changing all the time. Makes it kind of difficult. You ever felt that your company's, by the way, running after the latest kind of like problem and issue that you have? And you're always very reactive instead of, preparing for things? Probably high volatility, complexity, and so on. It's difficult to prepare for things. Last thing, the A part, ambiguity. there is rarely one clear choice on how to move forward. You might have multiple options. Which one is the right one? Should I pick A, B, or C? I have no clue. I can only pick one. If I bet wrong, we go under as a company. If I pick right, we might survive. Isn't that fun? So you have a lot of ambiguity in things. You also don't know if whatever you're looking at is actually real. You see a problem. Is the problem actually real? Or am I just seeing something, other symptoms of something else that I don't understand? Makes things really, really difficult. Now, why do I bring this up? And what does this have to do with an organization culture? The metaphor that I like to use when talking about culture is, unfortunately, most companies usually look more like a machine. You have gears and, imagine any kind of engine, machine, whatever you want. With that metaphor that it's a machine, if you want to change it, what do you think happens to a machine if I apply an unexpected force on that machine? What's going to happen?
Breaks.
It breaks, right? It's not very adaptive to something. Machines can fall apart in very unexpected ways when you have a VUCA world. You have some unexpected big change coming on. Think about when COVID started. How well did your company react to that unexpected change? I know some companies that literally had issues with going remote because their company policy forbid them from using cameras on laptops. And the only place you were allowed to use the cameras were in the meeting rooms, in the office. And they had disabled all the cameras on the laptops of every employee in the organization because they're a security risk. Isn't that fun? And now everyone's supposed to be at home with a camera on a laptop that doesn't work. They literally had to buy external USB cameras to get on there because that was the easiest way to get a camera working on their laptops. That was an interesting problem. And that was kind of like a very, a machine, probably worked really well, but when you have an unexpected thing happening, it doesn't really react very well. So the metaphor I like to use for organization is more like a tree, a plant, something organic. This is in Poland. Some trees, you can find it online. No one really knows why they're bent like that, by the way. But they're bent like that. Something bent them, all these trees.
Sorry for this.
Maybe? No one knows. So, but they're still alive. I mean, something applied a force to them, and the plant survived. The tree grew. It just went 90 degrees and then tried to, go straight up again. That's how I would like to see organizations. If you disturb them somehow, something unexpected happened, the organization reorganizes itself, reforms itself, and then survives whatever interruption or change you put on that organization. But if you imagine like the organizational culture of an organization that is very machine-like and an organization that is very plant-like, organic-like, that culture must be different, right? It can't be the same kind of organization in both of these. So organizations should be able to adapt, change, bend, but not break. And we want that an organization can do that quite fast. Because if you're very, very slow in adapting to a change, what happens? You run out of money, resources, competitors overrun you, and so on. Survival of the fittest, right? I mean, if you're in a competitive market and your competitor can adapt and change faster than you, what does that give you to your competitor? It gives them an advantage, right? They can out-adapt you faster than you can. So I would argue that for any company to survive in the long run, it is essential that they can change, and they can change fast. Because there's going to be something coming after COVID, after war, all this stuff. The next unexpected thing, whatever that happens to be, maybe in 5, maybe 10 years, the ones that are going to adapt fast to that will be in a good position whenever that hits us. So it would be a good idea to prepare an organization to be able to do something like that. Whatever you throw at the organization, they can adapt and change to that thing. And the thing that you need for that is the right kind of organizational culture. What is culture? Anyway, what do you think is culture in an organization?
default choices.
It's a way of doing things.
Sorry?
It's a way of doing things.
The way of doing things, yes. How do we do things in our company? Yeah, in the back?
I would say it's how we actually should interact with each other to respect or gain decisions
Yeah.
together.
How do we make decisions? Does the boss make the decisions? Do we make decisions together? That would also describe your culture, right? So culture is also about the goals and values that we have as an organization. The value system you have. What do you believe in as an organization? What do you believe is the right way, the best way to do things? That is what makes up your culture. It also is made up by the behavior and interactions of all the people in your organization. It's how the people behave, in that organization in there. If you have a culture that is very process-driven, very hierarchical, people will behave in a certain way. If you have a culture that is extremely collaborative, they will behave in a different way. It's how those people are interacting that make up your culture. So the culture is created through the experiences that people have in an organization. That's how you create a culture. If you create experiences with people where, if you don't follow the process, you're fired, you will get a certain kind of culture. If you create experiences where we're working on a problem together and we find solutions together, you get a certain kind of culture in that organization. Makes sense, right? So your culture is defined by how the people have experienced the past in your organization. That's how you also define, how do you create a culture in there, through those experiences that people have in that organization. Now that also gives you a challenge. Changing culture is not an easy thing, right? If you want to have a different culture, doesn't that mean you need to create different experiences for the people in that organization? And what if you have 1,000 people? How do you change the thinking, the mindset, the behavior of those 1,000 people to get to a different culture? Again, not an easy thing to deal with. Just to give you also a dictionary definition of it. A culture, that I like the B one here most for the context we're talking about. A set of shared attitudes, values, goals, and practices that characterize an institution or organization. That would be a dictionary definition of culture. Similar to what we talked about. So, as I mentioned, first thing you need to do when talking about culture is to able to understand what culture do you actually have in your organization. Second is, how do you change it? So let's start a little bit going deeper into how to know anything about your culture. Yeah, they're competing. Pulling each other down. Anyone heard of something called the competing values framework? No? This is the most used model for understanding organizational cultures and also to measure and quantify it. If you go literally on Google Scholar, for example, and put in competing value framework, you will get thousands of hits on papers in there. Down to in company X organization culture study done with competing values framework and so on. You'll find plenty of stuff on this. The reason I like this particular model is this has actual scientific background. It comes from research, from universities. It's not made up by a consultant. Unfortunately, a lot of the other models out there are usually consultant-made and don't really have research to back up. The guys that came up with this, both researchers, both PhDs, both working at the university as professors, Kim Cameron, Robert Quinn. If you go on Amazon, put their names in, you'll find the books on them, from them that will tell you all the way. There's a whole chapter in their book in how they validated it with statistical model science, stuff like that, that it actually works and so on. I'm personally not a PhD and I'm not a science guy, so I'll just trust them that they did it right. I have friends who do PhDs and they say it's good. So that's what I want to give you a little bit in how to understand the culture. And it's also explained why it's called competing values in there. So, in competing value frameworks, first of all, there are two kind of like directions that we have. An organization can be in the direction of flexibility and discretion, or in the direction of stability and control. You see the competing part here already? Because you cannot be flexible and stability at the same time. You can't have discretion and control. Discretion means, you get to decide. Control would mean I, the boss, decide. So every organization is probably somewhere on this axis. You can be extremely stable and controlled, or you can be in that direction, or somewhere in between. This is not a black and white thing. It's also when you run, they also have the tools for actually assessing an organization on the organization culture. But you're somewhere on that axis, every organization. And also to keep in mind, every team, every department in the organization is somewhere on that, and not every team or department is at the same place within that organization. So actually when you do this in organizations, you also often look at, do we have different departments that are different? You know, do you have one department that is here and one department that is there, for example? Is something you want to look at. There's a different dimension we want to look at. An organization can be internal focused and focused on integration, or an organization can be external focused and differentiation. Again, you can't be integration and differentiation at the same time. It doesn't make sense. I mean, how can I integrate with you and at the same time I want to be completely different from you? That doesn't work out. You are somewhere on that axis. Now, you see that there's 4 quadrants there? Consultants love those, so we have 4 quadrants. If you take flexible discretion, integration and focus, and integration there, what you end up with is a culture type called, well, they call it a clan culture, but I like to describe it as a collaborative clan. Collaborative clan means, we work together on problems, we solve problems together, cooperation, interactions, teams, all that kind of stuff. Because you're flexible, discretion, the people have a lot of power to decide things, but also internally focused and integration. You're focused on your own teams and you're trying to kind of like be together in this thing. Now if we go to the right, but still stay unflexible, we get a creative adhocracy. You could call this also, startups tend to be in that direction quite a bit, which means we're not trying to be integration, we're differentiation. Everyone gets to decide what they do and everyone does something different, in a different way. They are not necessarily teams, there might be lots of individuals, but every individual is empowered to do whatever they want, in the extreme case. Sorry? Maybe, I don't know. But, as I said, a lot of startups tend to be quite far in this direction because there's a lot of empowerment and lots of people doing different things. Now, if you go down one more, we go now to stability and control, but stay on the external focus, we get a competing market culture. This is the culture where we're all competing against each other. There's probably strong KPIs, metrics, maybe you fire 10% of the worst performing people every year, that kind of stuff. And if you're in the top 10%, you get a promotion and a big bonus or something like that. That would be a competing market culture. If we go one more to left, we get a controlling hierarchy. Well, we're trying to all be, the same, integrated, but it's all about stability and control. It means processes, clear responsibilities, who decides. You must follow the process. If you don't follow the process, it's bad. Everyone knows their place in the organization, and we work. By the way, when I describe the machine as the metaphor, they tend to be controlling hierarchies. Question to most of you. Where do you think your own company is?
Somewhere in between.
Between which? In the middle? Like here?
Good access line.
If I had to guess, a lot of companies tend to be here. Especially larger ones and older ones. Certainly companies I worked in have been there. Controlling hackers.
Wait, under the hood, mostly they are into the first quadrant or the second one.
You mean these two up here?
This one, yes.
Yeah,
But on the paper, everybody is in control.
So, a couple of things on the model more. Good to understand before we talk about anything else. The kind of like different corners here, are conflicting cultures. You cannot be at the same time a creative adhocracy and a controlling hierarchy. It just doesn't work. Same people, you couldn't be sometimes controlled and sometimes you have freedom to do whatever. Also, the interesting thing is, if you have different departments in an organization that are, one is creative adhocracy, other one controlling hierarchy, they have trouble even communicating and working together, collaborating. Because on the controlling hierarchy expects a process, a clear responsibilities and so on, and that's what they expect from the other department, that is a creative autocracy, who is like, what process? We don't have a process, we don't want a process. Good luck having them cooperate with each other. If you, by the way, ever wondered why when a large organization that is here buys a startup, and that startup doesn't end up working, that's because the startup was in there. And now it ended up in a company that has a dominating hierarchy that is strong, and that kind of kills the other culture relatively quickly, because they're literally incapable of working together. Obviously, this direction as well, you can't be a collaborative plan and a competing market at the same time. That makes no sense, doesn't work. Another thing to notice is natural progression. This comes also from the research. Cameron and Quinn actually looked at companies over decades and run the assessments on the culture of that company multiple times. And there's a natural progression from creative down there, usually somewhat controlling in there. You start up, starts here. You become a little bit bigger, you have teams, you work collaboratively together. Can give you a concrete example. That was when I started in the late 90s, first kind of like really good paying job. We were this. A couple of years later, we grew. When I started, we were like less than 20 people. We grew. We became a collaborative clan. We worked well together. Then we became like closer to the 100 of people and hired new managers. We felt like we don't have enough processes, and we moved to controlling hierarchy. Literally as bad if you wanted to purchase a book, there was a process that running internally cost more than the book itself, which was crazy. That was the time when I left. I don't know if that company ever went to that one, but we clearly progressed through that. That's something that happens quite a bit. Now, question. When we talk about a VUCA world, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, what kind of organization culture do you think has a better chance in dealing with that?
Collaborative.
Collaborative? Huh?
That's probably fairer.
You think these two?
Yeah.
Huh? I would argue that probably the most important thing you need is the flexibility and discretion. Any culture in the upper quadrant, upper two quadrants has a better chance. Yes?
I go for a lower first. The reason is it's dependent company. They would like to be the owner or boss. You can survive even with commanding here.
Sorry, I didn't hear almost anything you said, but something about this, I guess?
No. If company has good boss,
Yeah, good boss?
and you can survive even with controlling hierarchy.
Sure. Yeah.
It depends on the team. If
Yeah.
it's too much bureaucracy, basically not made.
Yeah. I'm not saying that every controlling hierarchy is doomed to fail. But if you look at it statistically, my argument would be that probably the more flexible and discretion you have in your organization, the better your chances are in surviving it. Because changing an extremely stable and control-driven organization tends to be really difficult, at least quickly. Because they don't like change. They want stability, and then changing it quickly and often becomes a big, big issue. So we're talking about probably cultures in this upper quadrant. By the way, if we talk about agile, where do you think agile organizations end up in this? And there is studies on this as well.
In general, I would say a good agile organization would serve all four fields. You need all four elements, basically.
Depends on the part of the organization a bit, yes. But averagely, most agile organizations tend to be up here in those two as well.
Name one.
Reactor in Finland
Okay.
would be up there, definitely. I can only name Finnish companies because that's the only ones that I really know of. I mean, Reactor would definitely be there. Gopher would be also as well, definitely up there. They're all like 1,000 people agile organizations. They're extremely high up on this. I haven't seen official studies from them, but that's where I would rate them based on the experience that I have seen. So yeah, agile organizations tend to be up there because that's, agile is about collaboration, working together. It's about constantly changing, adapting, and so on. So you can't be very hard on the stability and control down there. wouldn't really fit most agile organizations. And competing also would not make sense in there, so we're usually out there. So now that you understand this, the next question is, how do you know what culture do you actually have in an organization? 3 ways. First one is, not really my favorite one, but I run into this from time to time. Somewhere, CEO quote says, I know my culture, and we are extremely collaborative. First hint is probably not. How would you know that? What data do you have to back that up? The interesting thing is, I've done culture studies in different clients over the years, and one of the exercises we like to do with the leadership is, after we've collected the data, we do a workshop, and we ask the leadership to kind of like self-assess their organization and what do you think your culture is? And we do that so that every leader does that by themselves, independently from each other, and then we put them up. First thing you usually notice is that everyone in the C team has a completely different idea of how the culture is. And then you put up the real data and you go like, yeah, half of them think they have a different culture from what the data actually shows, which is interesting. So be careful of someone saying, I know what the culture is. How do you know that for sure? How do you back that up? It's difficult to do. Now, to really know, there are some ways to do this. This comes from the competing value framework. It's called the OKAI, Organization Culture Assessment Instrument. I love the name. If you go up, read the books and so on, also if you just Google for it, you'll find tens and tens of consulting companies that will run this for you, this assessment. It's a survey, looks roughly like this. There's 6 sets of statements like this, and it asks everyone to distribute 100 points between these 4 different statements that you have. So, organization is very personal, it's dynamic and entrepreneurial, result-oriented, controlled and structured place, and you ask people to divide 100 points between those 4 different statements. There's 6 sets of these. I'm not going to show you all 6. You can find them yourself. And out of this, you get results. I put up some here. This is from an actual client that I run this assessment in. So not fake data, but of course I'm not going to name the company there. You can create graphs like this. What you can see out of this one, the blue one is now, and the red one is preferred. Preferred is what would they like their culture to be, because that's a good thing to ask as well. And you can see that this particular organization is relatively high on the collaborative there, relatively low on creative, but they would like to be more collaborative and more creative. That's data. Another thing we visualized in this particular case, these 4 different balls are different teams in that organization. The solid one tells what they are now, the other ball tells what they would like to be, so you can visualize kind of like what the change, the difference is, in what direction they want to go. That's the kind of data you would get out of this. Obviously there's a lot of other things. I mean, our report for this is like 20 slides, with like breaking it down by departments, by countries, all this kind of stuff. There's another way I want to show in how to change an how to quantify an organization culture. This is another tool that we use called an organizational scan. This collects micro-narratives, short, stories about a decision, something that happened in your organization, that the person writing that story self-evaluates. Some of the things they're going to use are those triangle-looking things. It asks kind of like you to move that point in those 3 different directions. These things here. And out of that data we can also then generate things like you see up here, the left one. You see kind of like that this particular organization, again, real data I took from actual client. They're quite on the collaborative there, but there's also a data set relatively strong on the controlling part. The thing with the green and the red dots is, how is that story perceived by the person telling the story? Green is a positive story, red is a negative story. And then you can actually go in and actually read those stories that are negative in there to get examples of why do people feel that we are being controlled. And then you can start doing things about this. That's why I like this particular technique more than the OK, because you actually get real information of people. There's also a problem with the survey. I cannot run that survey with a 100 points division every 2 weeks. I mean, if I could, if I did, what do you think would happen? After a couple of times you don't want to answer it anymore because you're doing the same questions every 2 weeks, kind of like, enough of this stupid survey. This I can run the whole time. I mean, every time you write a different story, tell me what happened this week. Tell a story about something that happened to you in your company and evaluate it. It takes a couple of minutes, max 5 minutes to do this, and you get some data out of it. If you get enough people to do this, you get relatively good data on your organization culture. And you can visualize this over time, because every story has a date. So also don't show it here, but what we can do with the visualizations is also do, how did it look today, and how did it look like 2 months ago? Did something change? Did this picture change over time? Because if you're changing an organization culture, you want to maybe that it goes into a certain direction. Maybe you want these to become less. You have less negative stories of these kind of things, and that's what you could do. So that's another way in how to do this. This is something you don't find that much. We're the only ones doing this. A couple of things before I need to end on changing culture. I want to leave you with 2 different things. If you know what your culture is, you know where you want to go, in how to change something at least. These 2 are by far not the only things you can do to change an organization culture, but at least I want to give you something more concrete. So, one thing, and I'm not expecting you to read all this. This is like half a day of training to cover all of this. Leadership archetypes. The important things are the top row there: expert, coordinator, peer, coach, and strategist. These are archetypes in how your leadership is organized in an organization. So an expert archetype leadership model is where you have an expert who tells the people how to do things, when to do things, and so on. It's how you're organized as an organization, as a structure. Coordinator, the leader is seen as a coordinator. There's a team around and I'm coordinating the work of the different people that I have in there. The peer, a leader is seen as a peer to everyone else. You start to, by the way, see how these relate to the organization cultures as well. Expert, this archetype tends to be strong in hierarchical organizations. While once you start getting towards peer, you start getting more to a collaborative organization. If the leader is seen as a peer to the people that he leads, it's a different model that you have in there. And once you start getting to coach, so the leader is seen as a coach of the people that he leads, it's again even more collaborative. And strategist is the kind of like even one step further. It's kind of like that you're also helping the team that you're working with not just to do their work, but to also figure out, what is the outcome, where are we going in the long run here. So that's one of the things. And changing that model. If you see your organization very strongly here and you're very hierarchical, maybe the leadership archetype model you need to slowly change to is to maybe a more of a coordinator one. Once you get that, maybe you get more to a peer model and you can kind of like start changing the way you work. Yes?
How much time does it take to take the change?
Depends on the size of the organization.
Okay, how much time does it take?
So if you have like a couple hundred people, 6 months, 12 months, somewhere in that frame, typically.
Would you accept the challenge? I can do it in 4 weeks.
Interesting. Talk about it.
Good try.
Good. Second thing I want to leave you with is leadership behavior, is how you act as a leader yourself. So different models in there. You can be a very directive leader, you can be a demanding leader, conducting leader, coaching leader, envisioning, or a catalyzing leader in there. Again, that's the way how you behave as a leader. I'm not saying that any of these is actually better than any other. All of these are needed at certain circumstances, but using the right kind of approach at the right moment is probably going to help you change the culture as well. If you are a very directive leader right now, whoever you happen to be in an organization, and don't mean leader as a big boss, I mean also anyone in a team can be a leader in a certain situation. But if you're very directive and you want to be less hierarchical and you want to be more collaborative, probably this is not the leadership style you should be choosing at that particular moment, right? Which one would you choose here if you want to become more collaborative? What behavior would be a more collaborative one?
Coaching?
Coaching, definitely. Already conducting would be more collaborative. Coaching would be even more. Depending on what exact situation you have, you might be conducting, you might be coaching. But that means that you need to learn how to be a coaching leader, right? If you spend 20 years to be a directive leader, it's not going to be easy to change to coaching tomorrow. You need some help, right? Again, you need coaching as the leader itself to change your own way of doing things. Cool. Edgar is going to run in a few moments and say that I'm out of time. So I'm not going to go more deeper into these. If you want to know more about these, that would be this part. You can find out much more. That will be our e-learning course on the basics of this. If you want to try out and find which kind of leadership style do you have yourself and what kind of archetype maybe you're representing in yours, that thing at the top of one, the QR code, leadership assessment, is our leadership assessment. That's not the one that I showed you there, but it's a different one that we use to find out what kind of leadership style people have in an organization. You can try that out if you want. It will give you a nice report what your dominant leadership style is and archetype. I'm out of time? I said Edgar's going to come in a few minutes. Good prediction.
Just 2 minutes over.
2 minutes of time left. So.
You're over.
I'm 2 minutes over already. Okay.
But we have 5 more minutes for questions.
Yeah. So, questions. What do you want to know? In the back.
Yeah, we have a big problem in our company.
Yes?
We have a lot of talent in developers, but people miss the concept of done.
Okay.
Something is not like...
Things don't get done.
You tell a developer, do a PDF export, but he doesn't actually do a one-to-one copy.
Okay.
Why don't you see the line should be like 3 pixels up and the date is in German, why do you show it in English? Like, these kind of things. And the PDF is almost perfect, but it's not perfect. Then I have to lose 1 hour of my time, and so on.
Yes?
What would be your recommendation, like, to prepare the team for the concept of done?
I would like to find out a bit more on why that is happening. You know, what's the reasons behind it before saying this is how to fix it, because I don't know why that is happening. You're describing what is happening, but not the why for it. And that's where I would start, is figuring that out before doing anything. Yes?
How you're coming up with this interesting point about saying why.
Yes?
Actually, all coaches are currently going to the direction that they say never ask why, because why is causing problems.
Okay.
Because you are actually offending people. If you go with the why question, you always will offend people on a personal level.
Yeah.
So,
if you phrase it badly, yes. You need to, if you come off like, why are you doing this? Definitely.
yeah,
Would offend them.
it wouldn't be better just ask what would be the solution.
But if that person gives you a solution without understanding what or why the problem is happening, it might be the wrong solution as well. So whoever that gives the solution would have to understand the why of the problem. I mean, I'm a big fan of understanding the root cause of a problem before trying to figure out what the solution to it is.
That's why startups are never developing.
There was another question?
Yeah, I've got, I'm just curious to your
Yeah.
experience. So there are like 4 quadrants that you've
Yes.
shown us. Have you, in your practice, seen a company, an organization, or a team that didn't really fit in any of those? Or you just struggled to place it somewhere?
Yeah. So there's kind of like 2 different types of diagrams you can end up with. So one type is the company that are extreme in one direction. They're like very collaborative, very hierarchical. And then you end up with these that are kind of like almost similar in everything.
Oh.
At least on the average of the organization. Sometimes when you dig down, you find that different parts are more towards other ends. But that also tells that they don't really have a culture, dominating culture. They're a bit like all over the place. Which might be okay, might not be okay. Also keep in mind that inherently none of the cultures are better or worse than the others. It's just certain cultures fit certain situations or circumstances better than others, depending on what your purpose is as an organization. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as an agile team, do you have any tips how to deal with a client that is more hierarchical?
Right.
So, yeah, so they provide VAs, POs,
Yeah.
etc. And we're an agile team, so how do you deal with that?
Well, at least you're in the next to each other quadrants, which means you can still, you have something in common with them, right? So if you're hierarchical and you're very collaborative, at least you have things in common. If you were with a very competitive, you might be in even more trouble. Problem sounds like outsourcing business, something in that direction.
Yeah.
Biggest problem I've had in that business is for them to understand that you're doing iterative and incremental development, and that means they need to participate. If their expectation is that in 2 years we're going to get the results and it's going to be perfect, and your expectation is that every 2 weeks you have a sprint review and they help you make it better, then that's not going to work. But if you can get them to participate, at least somehow, then you probably have a chance in there. That's been my if you can get the product owner to be on their from their side, that might help. If you get a good product owner who's on the client side, but again, not easy. Yeah.
So if you have more questions, come to Lasse here in front in break time.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Lasse.
Cool. Thank you.